Thank you, Congresswoman Norton. And now I'll yield to Mr. Casar from Texas for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I really appreciate the Oversight Committee hosting today's hearing because we've had 35,000 people killed by gun violence this year alone. And instead of having hearings on critical issues like this, we've unfortunately been often pushed into hearings about Twitter or about the DC City Council instead of about how do we prevent the deaths of hundreds of children by passing common sense gun safety legislation. My district in the heart of Texas is a very short drive from Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, where we're still mourning 19 children, 2 teachers, and a whole community devastated by the killing there by a horrible shooter with an assault weapon and a weapon of war. And bulletproof doors and giving guns to teachers cannot be the solution because we've seen from the data that that has not solved the problem. We need to reinstate the assault weapons ban. We need to raise the age for buy a gun. We need those universal background checks. And even though after the killings in Uvalde and in Texas and across the country, Democrats in Congress came together to pass important legislation, so much of that legislation would not have prevented what happened in Uvalde. And in my time here in Congress, I've seen that the money, the corporate gun lobby has been what has held so much of this legislation back. One estimate shows that the NRA has donated more than $140 million to corporate gun lobby candidates since 2010. And we need to continue to have that conversation so that the American people can finally push this Congress to overcome that sort of money, because if a shooter is determined to hurt innocent people and they're a dangerous person, and we continue to have these guns anywhere for everybody all the time without a license, open carried in places like Texas, we know that the killing is only going to get worse. And so I so appreciate the Oversight Democrats hosting this roundtable and each of you for your testimony and advocacy. Ms. Kefford, I just can't imagine the continued pain in your community and after what it is that students and teachers and community members experience that. Marjory, Stoneman Douglas, can you tell us what you think? You know, oftentimes we hear from politicians that giving teachers guns would have stopped mass shootings. Do you think that would have stopped the mass shooting from occurring at your school?
I don't think giving more people guns would have stopped that shooting. Certainly, police responded to that tragedy, that horrible tragedy, with their weapons. Unfortunately, lives were already lost. There is a need for mental health resources. There is a need for people in schools. Almost every child in this country goes to school, right? Who sees those children more than probably their parents do, their teachers, staff at schools. Having resources in place for early warning signs, for identifying when there's an issue, for providing that support is absolutely critical. Not always is it going to solve the problem to have those resources in place after. We need to have those resources all along, right? Before tragedies and after tragedies. And I think making sure that there is funding for that in place is absolutely 100% critical. I also think from a safety perspective, having a trained school resource officer who has specific training and experience working with adolescents, working in schools is critical to, number one, foster that relationship and ensure that there's safety in that school. Mr. Timpson spoke about that just a few minutes ago, about that relationship piece and having that exposure of young people to law enforcement and how important bridging that relationship is.
Thank you. And Professor Blocher, when the Second Amendment was drafted, do you think the Founding Fathers anticipated tens of thousands of innocent Americans being killed by gun violence every year?
I'm quite confident they did not. I'm also confident that the guns with which they were familiar were black powder muskets, which, having fired one, I can tell you takes about a minute to load and frequently misfires. There's no possible way they could have conceived of a situation like what transpired at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, or for that matter in Lewiston, or for that matter at any of the other place names which we all know, unfortunately, all too well.
I appreciate the clarity of your remarks. I appreciate us bringing folks together to have oversight on this critical issue, look at how it is we can save thousands of lives every year, and have oversight over the corporate gun lobby and the amount of money that they put into the system that keeps us from taking on reasonable solutions that are constitutional, that are up to date, and that are just the baseline response to the gun violence, both mass shootings and everyday killings that we see in our community. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congressman Casar. And